different beasts entirely in the world. China and Myanmar rule in terms of pricing. Argentina fits in below them. Production levels in those countries will probably be such that the world price will not change too dramatically, and it might be a little bit easier, if only in response to the increase in production in the Americas. My forecast for beans is kind of flat going forward. I find it more difficult to think about beans because of the different countries it's grown in, and it's harder to get a sense of what will be motivating farmers there to move up and down in terms of production. So this is more of a trend forecast going through to 2016. World production for beans is down on average. It's been way over 21,000 tons the previous 5 years. This past year, about 19.5. And looking at this coming year, about 20.7. So again, fairly low, and that's kind of a bullish or friendly scenario. And this is the edible bean price comparison. Looking at Argentine black beans, Argentine alluvias, and the average price in the US. The average price in the US is the blue line there, and you can see it's just shot up tremendously this past season. Alluvia beans have also been very strong. Black beans were much weaker, and that has been changing as they sell more to Mexico and places like that. So the black beans, they were fearful of carrying stuff over. Now they'll probably end up being sold out. So they're gonna clean up down there. The chickpea outlook, here I thought Cabulis are probably where I should put more focus on. The Mexican drought limited production last year. It will probably limit production again this year. They're talking about maybe 100,000 tons. I think it'll be closer to 80,000 tons because some of the Mexicans I talked to are talking 40 to 60. So it's a very wide range. And because the crop hasn't been fully planted yet and we're not seeing how it's evolving completely, it is still a picture in motion. India's Desi crop is officially lower than last year. The Kabuli crop may be higher, maybe. I guess it depends on how much damage has been from the cold weather recently and things like that, whether or not it actually ends up being higher or having a usable fraction. If there's frost damage to the crop, there may be parts that just can't go into world trade, and effectively reducing the crop in terms of from the trade's perspective, if not from a statistician's perspective. Kabuli prices, when I wrote this, I thought they could be lower on average in the coming season. I think Sudhakar thinks they'll probably be unchanged because, as he points out, world production is very much unchanged. And that could be bullish overall. However, if Mexico has a little bit more, and they do set the tone for the large Kabulis, they have been a bit more aggressive in their pricing than they were last season. So that's put a little bit easier tone, I think, to start it off. And hence, the price may actually end up being lower on average than it was this season when it set records. World Kabuli production, 5-year average was 11.28 million metric tons. The 2011 crop was 11.28, which was average. This is all chickpeas, Desi and Kabuli combined. And, oh no, that was Desi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind here. Kabuli being about just under 2 million metric tons in the previous 5 years. This year and last year being quite a bit below average, and that's why it keeps the market that firm tone. Desi probably up, possibly up in the coming year over it was this year, looking at not just in India but all over the world. And again, that's highly speculative as to whether or not that occurs, but I think there's good potential for that. When you look at the price comparison, Mexican 11 millimeter is obviously a premium chickpea, and that's at the very top level there. I looked at Australian Desi prices, which are at the bottom of the market, and the Canadian 8 millimeter, which occupies middle ground. And that just gives you a good sense of the overall picture of where we've been for the last few years on chickpeas. And Kabuli's obviously holding a premium to Desis. And I use the Australian Desi as a proxy because that's imported. I'm just about done. I'm sure I've gone over. I don't know. Apparently I'm speaking on IST, which sounds an awful lot like PST. That's my time zone. My time zone, we call it Pacific Stretchable Time. I don't know if that sounds familiar. when you have things happen in Vancouver, we had a dinner on Friday night, last Friday night. My two nieces who were there, both are seriously pregnant. And the one niece who was due first, she was an hour late for dinner. It turns out it was the other niece who was due second. Her baby was born on Saturday. So the other one I haven't heard, but I'm sure it's been born by now because it was due on Saturday as well. But the older one had to beat the younger sister, which is amazing that their sisters both got pregnant at exactly the same time and both due on exactly the same weekend and both having boys. It's quite incredible. I was thinking about the factors that drive price, and I think I'll go more quickly through this because I know that I've been talking for a long time. Competition for acres, competition for consumer demand are the two most important drivers. Competition for acres because farmers will move from one crop to the next depending on the relative profitability of the crop. I can't look into the minds of farmers to figure out what they think is profitable on a field-by-field basis, so I look at things like the gross returns and compare them out. When I look at the gross return of peas in Canada and lentils in Canada, we need to be around 120 to 125% of wheat and durum in order to grow acreage. We need to be 105% of canola in order to grow acreage of those crops. In the last year, pea returns have been very competitive, probably around 135% of cereal grains, around 90 to 95% of canola, and that's what will pull up acreage. Lentils have been way down below their recent average. They've been closer to 100%, I think, of wheat, so on a par, but they should be 120 to 125%, and they've been around like 75 to 80% of canola, so farmers just don't want to grow them. And I think that applies all over the world. When I talk to farmers, I tell farmers you have to look at the last part of this, which is consumer demand. You can't ask so much for your peas or lentils that people will eat rice instead, eat pasta instead, that they'll switch into another pulse. Conversely, you can't ask farmers to accept so little for their peas or lentils, even though I know India needs very low price, lots of quantity, but there is a point at which they won't grow them, and that is the problem that you face. So you have to think of that too when you're trying to negotiate for price, and you have to be accepting sometimes that you just have to pay more. And if you look forward, and that's why I wanted to start with the deep scenario, you can see in the long term you have to be very cognizant of the need to pay more, and I am done. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. With the permission of the chair and our chief guest, I have a brief announcement to make, ladies and gentlemen. Her Excellency has been kind enough to be with us, but she has an extremely busy schedule and she has a flight to catch. We thank you, Your Excellency, for being here with us, and may I request our chief guest and the chair for the session to please honor Her Excellency on behalf of India Pulses and Grains Association with a small memento. Thank you for being here with us, ma'am. Her Excellency, Dr. Christine Gogo, High Commissioner of Malawi to India, thank you for your presence here, ma'am. And here's looking for greater cooperation between both the countries. Mr. Rajiv Agarwal, IAS. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us. The airport rules these days are pretty stringent. So the planes will leave on time, but the roads don't help you reach any quicker or faster. So thank you so much for being with us, ma'am. We will continue with our session. Over to your chair, Mr. Rajiv
Thank you.
Agarwal.
There is a brief announcement. We were to break for tea at 11:30, but I suppose all of us we are running a little short of time. So we'll request Mr. Chandrasekhar to continue, give his presentation. And those of you who want to partake of tea, the tea is available outside, and probably you can come and take the tea and come inside. So, Mr. Chandrasekhar, I request now to make his presentation.